This evening, I have a couple of a few questions. One, Chuck Griffith from Minneapolis asked me to talk a little bit about listening to others. That's hard to do, isn't it? Quite often what happens is as we're listening to someone, depending on who it is, of course, how close we are to them, what our chemistry already is with that person. When we listen to someone else, we see that we're always adding and subtracting and judging and analyzing everything they're saying. The other person can't hardly say anything without our mind springing into action to either maybe disagree, we might not say anything, or agree or take exception to in some way. So we're always not exactly listening. It's difficult to just listen. I know in the interview room when I'm talking to someone one-on-one, quite often what will happen is I will say, do you have any questions? And they, rather than just coming out with a question, sometimes it's difficult to just say, yes, how can I be more sane? That would be a pretty good question. I rarely get that. I usually get a combination of ideas and people preparing the ground as if I'd never heard a question before and letting me know the very particular structure in which they are arriving at this. And so I have a lot of practice listening. So Chuck, you've asked the right person. Quite often the way that functions is what your dynamic already is with that person, whether that person is a close friend, someone you just met, that person is your teacher, that person is your student on whatever level that may be. So there's a lot of things that play into that. But I'm a little bit having a little bit of a presumption here about the way in which Chuck is asking this. And that is when it's challenging, when you know that you really need to be listening to a particular person more closely, but you find yourself wandering or daydreaming or being put off by what they say, or sometimes we just listen to somebody. It's not so much what they say, but we don't really like them. When I say we don't like them, I'm not saying that we have a particular judgment happening, but something about just kind of an uneasy feeling to sit and open up and listen. And I think what Chuck is asking about is how do you what are other ways that you can do this to work with this in such a way that you can actually listen better? And I think there are. But it's very difficult to just apply this unless you've actually listened to yourself. Unless you've actually sat down, held very still over a period of time. We call this meditation, of course, awareness practice. The way I teach it here is not about getting to a peaceful state of mind. I don't care if you ever get to a peaceful state of mind. If that sounds mean or disrespectful, then you should ask questions about it. And the reason I'm saying that is I would rather have you be uncomfortable and have you looking and listening to exactly what you personally need to do for your own, shall we say, sanity, or for your own fundamental well-being, in the well-being of all the people you come in contact with throughout your lifetime? And as to that. So if you've listened to yourself, if you've sat down, held still, and watched, listened to what your mind does, how it goes down and it goes up, and then it gets sparkly, and then it gets very dull, and then it flattens out, and then it starts to raise up again. I'm just using these images to represent all the different kinds of thought patterns: passion, aggression, ignorance, the way we fight with ourselves, the way we fight with our ideas, of everything that happens, anything that occurs in your mind. And this is addressed to everyone here. Anything that occurs in your mind when you sit should just be observed. Doesn't have to be pushed down or fluffed up or ignored. Just observe that. So that would be the fundamental training for listening, is start where you are, as Pema Chodron says in her book. Very good advice. Start exactly where you are in any case. You go in, you sit down. Every time you come into the meditation cushion, you sit down. If you're holding still, and if your attitude or your intention is or endeavoring to just see what this is moment by moment, in other words, beginner's mind, come in, sit down, and look. Hear, smell, taste, touch. Just this. And that's a pretty strong position for listening. But you can also, the same way you're sitting in your own mind, sometimes I'll say to people, if your mind, your discursive mind, your thinking mind, your analyzing mind, your judging, condemning, accepting, rejecting mind, or the mind that is arising with intense negativity with no story at all, which happens to some of us sometimes, just intensely feeling like crap with no backup, no explanation. This is why you're feeling this way. It just sucks. Just even that name, if you were to say that, you think that doesn't even fit. It's worse than that. That's street language. What I'm actually feeling here, I don't have words for this. It's just, it could be terrifying. It could be threatening. It could be, sometimes people have panic attacks that take it on that, have that kind of a mode. I've had those, so I know. I'm not just talking about what other people have told me. Panic attacks are, how should we say this? Not fun. I think that's a good way to say it. So to begin with, we would train ourselves, help ourselves, condition ourselves, you could say, recondition ourselves to, let's just sit down and just observe. Let's see what comes up. And if you get very discursive, and if you get sucked up into your mind, you forget you have 5 other sense fields happening that are also have their objects that would like a little bit of your attention, then you could actually go back and spread some of that awareness out. Say, sense of touch, how this feels, how your butt feels in the chair or the cushion, how your clothes feel. This is also listening. Sounds outside the building, or the lack of sound. Here this evening, it's been very quiet. That also has to do with sound. And seeing, just seeing the wall or seeing the floor, seeing other people. Just register that seeing in its simplest way. Just how people appear, the movements that are happening, and the lack of movement. An actual technique that you could use. You're sitting in front of somebody and you're listening to them, and you're finding that it's difficult to follow them or listen to what they're saying. You can actually track them in lots of different ways other than just follow their train of thought. Sometimes people's train of thought, although the expression is very genuine, they're following their train of thought. Why? They're the ones, they got the engine and the caboose. You know, they're the whole thing. They've got their own world. They think you're hearing them, but that's their world. But if you follow them, you think, this guy's crazy. Or this girl she's messed up. Probably wouldn't be that harsh, but you might think it's too bad. They seem to be running opposite directions, and then you might even think, adding on here, of course, or evaluating. It must be difficult to be in that situation. But then again, there are people who listen to you when you talk. I may not think you're doing so well either. Isn't it interesting how we can look around? We can talk to anybody for 10 minutes and see the way in which they're missing the boat. They're not quite clear about who they are, how they present themselves, and what's going on. It's kind of amazing because you are being viewed in the same way by others quite often. So coming back to how to listen, which is I think what Chuck was asking, how do you do this? So what you can do is actually, like when you're sitting, doing your sitting practice of meditation, shikantaza, the same thing kind of applies. You're out and you're listening to someone, and you also watch their body movement. Not by, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying if they're doing some kind of expression, you're analyzing what that means psychologically. We're not talking about psychology. Leave that to the psychologists. We're talking about awareness. Awareness. This is a spiritual path, not a mundane path. Not that you couldn't make it mundane, but to actually see someone's expression as they move or as their fingers twitch, and to also watch your own body language as you may respond or as you just sit still. And listen to the sound of someone's voice, not just the words. You might say, well, if I just listen to the spaces between the words, won't I miss what they're saying? You're not going to miss it. You're not going to miss much. Because what is being expressed and what you think is being expressed may not be the same thing. Anytime we hear something, we always hear what we think we hear. It's rare to actually hear what has been said. So you could look at the body position that the person is in. You can watch their expression. You can listen to the tone of their voice go up or down. You can listen to the speed, relatively speaking, of their delivery. The not to mention the subject matter. Just be with them. It's called communion. You're actually communing with someone. You don't have to disagree or agree at all. It's very interesting to watch and see how language moves from statements to questions to observations to very interesting area to watch. Maria Bardowska in Canada, in Toronto, has a couple of questions, and she has a quote here, but I don't really recall this quote. So I'm not saying I didn't say this, but I apologize, Maria. I'm not going to read a quote of what you said that I said because I don't feel that way anymore. So, but I can say, ask you and respond to your question about it. Is what is space? What is the space? I often say, look at the space in which things occur. I already know you can't do that, but I know if I say that, then you will look at what is occurring and you will endeavor, if you're trying to do what I'm saying at all, which you may not be, you will try to see, is there space around that? I don't really see any space around that. It looks like just the thing itself, just the sound, just the thought, just the memory, just the emotion. I don't see any space. That's the space. It is the space. And so to respond to Maria's question is, I would just say it's just a matter of repetition. It seems necessary to just continue to come back to it and come back until the spaciousness of that, until the quality that we refer to as the space in which things occur starts to show up. It may take a while. Do it anyway. And then her other question is, can ultimate trust be felt only when we see that we are not separate from another? Okay. Ultimate trust. I never said anything about ultimate trust, did I? Have I ever said that? Okay. I say trust. I might say that. Trust the space. And if something is ultimate, you can't actually feel it. Because feeling things has to do with relative situation. We feel something, then it goes away. We feel something, it goes away. Only when we see that we are not separate from another. Yes. I understand what you're asking. And I would say I would go back to the first question. No, I wouldn't worry too much about ultimate or relative, but I would concern myself and focus on just seeing what occurs and see if you can see the spacious quality of our situation and not particularly feel like you have to fill it up with a bunch of ideas or statements or beliefs or opinions. Space is scary. The way ego experiences space, and it doesn't like it, is not knowing. Like if I were to pick out some person in here, it's probably going to be Sokuzan, and said, "Wouldn't you like to know what I really think of you?" If you say that to anyone, it's like, yes and no. I don't exactly want to know. But there's kind of a not knowing feeling. That's how space, when we don't know what's going on with someone else or what they're thinking. And of course, I love Jason. So. But when we don't know that, then we get a little paranoid about it. But anytime we don't know something in terms of information or value, this is good, this is bad, I like this, I don't like this, this is on my side, I'm correct. This is why there's so much made these days of education and passing tests. And it's like, I don't know, what would you liken that to, the old test passing kind of thing? Anybody come up with a good?
Prisons.
Huh?
Prisons.
A prison, yeah, like a prison. How so?
Both have to do with evaluations by yourself and others.
So in terms of Chuck's question or the request that he made for me to talk about that, I would say initially listen to yourself without pushing or pulling or without doing anything with what you hear or what you experience. So listen through all of your sense fields. How this looks, how this appears. Everything is communicating all the time. How something feels is actually how your butt feels on the cushion, how your clothes feel when you put them on. It's just it's something we so much take for granted. So if that's just ordinary. I want to get to the really special stuff. Any questions? Sheldon?
A lot of times when I'm meditating, after after I do it for a little while, it seems like the thoughts are just I just don't know what they are.
Okay,
I mean, they come up. And
I'm following you. What's the question? I'm
How do
listening
you
to
listen
you.
to that?
You're doing it. You're commenting on it. And sometimes to make any comment on it starts to shut down on the listening part. And this is what we do, isn't it? Have you noticed that? You'll be talking, just pick out anybody, especially somebody you talk to all the time. Your mom, your dad, your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, son, daughter, dog. We have a certain, there's a certain kind of openness that gets established that only lets so much in. So we're always, anytime anything appears in that area, then we begin to add things to it. We can actually fill in. We don't fundamentally listen. If you fundamentally listen, and this is your koan for this evening, you won't know what's being said. This is called wisdom. If you think it's different than that, you have a long journey ahead of you. Yes, sir.
What do you respond out of?
Clarity,
What are you responding to?
confusion.
So what does what they're saying have to do with anything?
Because it's wisdom. They just don't know it, so therefore they're at war with themselves. They're at war with they're feeling like they're separate, and they have to. When I say they, I'm saying anyone. We're always taking exception. It may not be a full-out bombing raid, but it'll be some kind of a. I don't really care for that. This is not so good here. It's just a low burn of aggression. You know what I'm talking about. You can feel it. You can talk to just about anybody, and you can feel everyone here. You can pick out any person that you know and talk to that person. And if you really listen to them, you can feel the aggression in that person. Sometimes it's turned in on themselves. Sometimes it's out on you, and sometimes it's kind of in a holding mode where it's waiting for something. I'm not being all that arcane. It's just very simple feeling quality, but we don't really trust that. We don't trust, when I say we don't trust that, we don't trust the space in which that occurs. More. I'm not being all that clear, so you should be able to ask all kinds of questions.
Well, maybe that means I'm hearing.
Uh-oh.
What, when you say you won't really hear them, what does that mean?
I'm just saying you won't hear it in the conventional, you'll hear them, but your understanding won't be like complete, oh yes, okay, complete. Now I know exactly what they're saying and so on. It'll have that sense of spaciousness in it. Sometimes it's called, and I hesitate to use any fancy words here, but I'm using one, wisdom. It's a not knowing that is a complete knowing. It's a not knowing that is not specific. This is better than that. It's a not knowing that is completely accommodating. It's called bodhicitta, or the mind of awakening. And if you want it, it's yours, but you're going to have to give up some territory. When I say give up, I'm not saying find the territory and give it up. I'm saying see the way in which you're territorial. See the way in which you keep separating yourself from everyone else, from from everything in a way of kind of a protection, or kind of, as Trump Rinpoche talked about, paranoid insurance policy, which is how he referred to ego.
How should we listen to our teacher?
Just listen. You don't have to understand anything.
What about in situations like you talked about? Sometimes we find ourselves distracted by events during the day or preoccupations. What do we do, or how do we work with the preoccupation when listening to the teacher?
just watch it and then relate to the form that the teacher, in this case, this one, has set up, and align yourself with that form. The way we do it here every day, day after day after day. Took me decades to begin to understand this. How do you fundamentally help anybody? I mean, short of giving them $10 when they have a cardboard sign. How do you fundamentally help anybody? Well, one is Chuck's question is very great. You actually listen to them without buying into any kind of dynamic around it.
Chuck has a
Yes.
follow-up question. He said, what about in a leadership position in a group? How do you decide when somebody is talking too much, and how do you deal with it?
So the way we, for those of you who have read the outline for studying, for book study, we study several hours a week, study different Dharma books, traditional books out of the past. And when we discuss this, sometimes if you're the facilitator, you're kind of the leader. So the way I say this is always include. So if you always include, there's a way of doing that it will take, the chemistry that's involved there will take care of itself. Maybe not right away, but if you have, maybe I'm not addressing what Chuck is asking exactly, but I'm just using this as a situation as an example. You have one person who comes in and holds forth and tries to teach everybody else what's being studied. And so if you find that and you're the facilitator, you're not supposed to teach as a facilitator. You're supposed to help other people access the material. And you may have read the material over and over again, but don't teach. You never teach unless you absolutely have to teach. And then how will you know? You won't be able to stop it. But if you're sitting in a group of people and you're studying a Dharma book, and one person tries to explain it to everyone else, or kind of takes over, or holds forth, then you include them. Say how you pull them right out, and how does this apply to what we're talking about? Is a standard way of doing it. And the other way to do it is you can diffuse. Usually when someone is doing that, and again, like I'm saying, it may not, Chuck, you could be more specific about your question, but this may have resonate with you a little bit. Usually someone who wants to kind of take over or is acting in a way that is not mutually supportive will look to the person they perceive to be the authority. And of course, that would be the facilitator. So that person will generally address you. And what you do then is you stop being the facilitator. You don't give them any gaze. You look at other people, and you'll notice that their whole situation is based on trying to convince you. I always feel like I'm missing something when I say that. Maybe more of a more specific question.
There are a couple more though, and not from Chuck at the moment. But.
Okay.
This is from Chipe.
Yes.
Up in Traverse City. What about when you are listening to wrong views or outright lies, especially those directed at oneself?
I think as a practitioner, as a Buddhist student of the Buddhist teachings, less is better. No response. And if you respond in a way that is not verbal. Respond with your body language. See how much that changes this whole dynamic? The minute I start getting casual, respond that way. When someone comes at you with some kind of formal attack, this is what I presume that Jimmy talking about, you don't have to do much. You don't have to run away either. You don't have to smile at them necessarily. And you can actually, sometimes talking to inmates in prisons over the years where they say, what do I do? I'm trying to practice this path and I've got people wanting to attack me. And I say, but don't run away, but a little bit. I say, look at them, and then as soon as they start talking, drop your gaze. Look down. That's not running away. That's just dropping your gaze. And then when they stop talking, you can look back at them again. Interesting dynamic that happens there is it's basically saying, I'm here, I'm listening to you, but I don't want to fight with you. I'm here, I'm listening to you, but I'm not gonna fight with you. It's a very, very simple kind of situation. I'm not saying that's always going to work. You might be talking to a person who's insane. They might attack you anyway. So I don't know, no guarantees. Yes.
A question from Jim Johnson.
Yes, Jim.
He says, thank you for doing this. As we gain awareness of our mind and our thoughts through shikantaza after we finish meditating, is there any work to be done with our thoughts?
Well, that's what our study is about. We study the concepts and those teachings that have come down through the years. We're studying every day at noon, every Tuesday night, every Monday night, every morning, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. I don't know if there are any more than that. Something like that. But we're studying, so we're bringing our conceptual mind to these teachings and looking at what does Dogen have to say? What does Longchenpa have to say? What does Dan Lusthaus have to say? What does Khenpo Sotrim Gyamtso have to say about how does the mind work? There's so many. This is just the Buddhist teachings. You can go lots of other directions where there are all kinds of other ways of looking at the mind, but I'm very, very interested in the mind, not just confined to Buddhism. I'm very interested in how consciousness works and have been very curious about it. So I would say, I think studying, and also as far as sometimes called meditation in action, is stay in your senses. Sometimes it's advisable to take a particular concept if you're having difficulty with it and write it down and think about it, reflect on it. Like everything is dependently arisen. Basic teaching of the Buddha is nothing comes from its own side as some kind of individual thing that's separate from everything else. Everything is dependent on everything else for its apparent identity, which I've said probably 1,000 times. But to actually begin to see that and encourage yourself to look at, to actually say to yourself under your breath, or however you want to say it, everything is dependently arisen. Everything I see is as an apparent separate situation or person is dependent on everything else for its apparent singularity. It's to actually have that begin to dawn on you with all of the implications, all of the intensity that is there, is overwhelming. It's called awakening. And it happens on a completely highfalutin spiritual level, head in the clouds, and it happens right down where all the cement and dirt is. It's completely ordinary. You have your feet on the ground and your head is as far as you can see. And it's not an experience. It's just this.
Another question?
Who was it from?
Oh, this is from Brittany. From
Sure.
Travis. She asks, is there a way to really listen to people and set boundaries that seem healthy to the relationship?
Okay, so initially setting boundaries is something that we do out of our preconceptions and out of hope and fear. So those boundaries they may be workable, but we have whole governments that are run on hope and fear. So that's why we have such intense boundaries. We want a 30-foot wall all the way across the Rio Grande, or the length of the Rio Grande, that's a boundary, but that's based on intense fear. So interpersonal boundaries, some of those are, the actual boundary that is there is I think it's difficult to, you could say, get a feeling of being protected from things and yet still being intimate. So it's something that each of us have to do. I think your own spiritual practice, when you finally begin to make friends with yourself, trust yourself, even your negative, you should be able to sit in a chair at Starbucks and have really intense negative feelings and emotions just spontaneously come through your consciousness. Do nothing with it. Don't say, where's this coming from? Or, and also don't say, how do I get rid of this? Will this ever go away? This is kind of how we panic and we go back into our apparent individuality or ego and try to make sure that doesn't happen again, or figure out why is this happening, or maybe I should see a doctor, maybe I should get some medication. So I encourage people, don't take any medication unless you have to. If you have to, then by all means, take Wellbutrin, Prozac, whatever. But the idea of a boundary, it seems necessary to see what the actual natural boundary of our own mind is. Who actually is this, and what are we afraid of here? What kind of boundaries do we have with what are we stopping ourselves from seeing? What kind of boundaries have we set up with ourselves to keep from looking deeply at our mind and seeing what this mind is? If one is awake or realized, then the boundaries are more natural. They just seem to be pretty obvious, but where you should push, where you should pull, where you should stay out of, where you should go into, seem to be more natural. Jesse?
Why does it hurt when we don't listen to ourselves?
Say more. Good question. Say more.
Well, it seems to me like you're saying that listening both to ourselves and others relieves suffering. Is that what you're? I guess that would be my first question. Does listening relieve suffering?
I think it can some. We're since someone else is talking and can, trying to communicate with us, then being with them seems to be, no matter what you do, they're going to be projecting onto you. They may not even realize that they may even question you. Are you listening to me? Sometimes people will say that to you and say, well, yeah, I'm listening. Then we say, well, you're not saying anything. Well, that's because I'm listening to you. Sometimes people want and they'll often say, so what do you think about what I said? Or what people don't want too much space. They want to have what we call, what is that? Swapping opinions, the conversation, back and forth, back and forth. It's not that you can't have a little bit of that. I'm not saying we should get rid of that, but quite often there's a lot of that. A lot of that happens that tends to cover up things that need to be looked at or listened to, either this way or this way. So if we're not really listening, then perhaps things can build up and try to come up in other ways that make us uncomfortable or make us even sick sometimes. What do you think? You're a nurse.
I don't know. Does not listening cause an illusion of separateness?
Yeah. It adds to it. It fuels that. Not listening. If we really listen, we won't really understand. It's difficult to convey that. We understand some, but there's a whole lot of kind of missing it when we're listening with everything we've got, with all of our sense fields are not only this way, but are this way. We're just here. And if you're here, then there's kind of a natural kind of intelligence that's operating that doesn't really have a self behind it. It isn't operating out of hope and fear, hoping things will be better. Things are fine. Hoping things don't get worse. Things are fine. You might say, well, we don't want to do that. Look at all the terrible people in the world. What if somebody robs us, or we aren't on guard enough? Well, that's always a possibility. It's a difficult world. So that has to be looked at also. Senchu.
What's the difference between not knowing or not understanding that feels like confusion or like something is wrong, and fundamental not knowing?
I think it's just that. The fundamental not knowing it comes out of seeing there's nothing really you can know. I mean, everything is just stuff to know. So fundamental not knowing is like that. That anything you need to know is going to be there. To be there. So it's basically what we're saying is trusting the space, even though the space can create kind of for ego, the space is like agoraphobia, fear of open spaces. Too much space. If I come in here and sit down and just look at everybody for an hour, how long will you be able to stay here? I'm not going to do that because I get bored and I like to talk. So it's a very good question, and it could be you could work with your own awareness of how that works for you. It's a really good question. So how and to use that and see that that's what we call it a touchstone, but it's like when you see yourself kind of panicking about not knowing, you can relax. You can return to the things that are always there. Senses, gravity. Don't forget gravity. Probably your best friend. Never let you down. Well, I don't know. That's probably not very funny, but I thought it was funny. It might pull you down, but it won't let you down. It's like that. You're here every day, and we count on certain things to be there. We look in the mirror and didn't see it. You had no head anymore. That would be really disconcerting. But to someone who has realized that wouldn't be all that shocking. Was that? Have I responded to that in a way that is helpful to you? Sheldon.
If we're actually listening, will we know what we're hearing?
You may and you may not. You may have to say, what was that you said? And then they'll say, I've said this over and over again. Aren't you listening? And you have to risk that and say, yeah, I was distracted by something my teacher said. So you may not hear it in terms of information about it. If someone's, what is the situation? If you're really listening to someone, you'll hear what they're saying and be able to replicate what they just said and maybe paraphrase what they said. So that's not always the case. Although if that attitude is there of just allowing and accommodating or being with and including whatever is happening, you're probably going to be pretty clear about what's being said. You might not have a lot of things coming up alongside of that saying that what they're saying is not true or what they're saying is a lot of extraneous kind of ideas about what they're saying rather than just hearing what they're saying without anything extra. That's like watching your own mind, observing your own mind rise and fall. Thoughts come, thoughts go, thoughts come, thoughts go.
Earlier you were talking about how we could see negativity in people when they're talking to us. Yeah. Yeah, it seems like we ignore that a lot of the time, most of the time. We see it, but we add something to it right away, either how we feel about it or what we think that it
Yes.
is. So in order to actually be listening to that, do we need to not be adding on to that?
You know, all you need to do is to see that you add on. You don't have to stop adding on. I mean, I might say, don't add, but again, we add. And if I say, well, if you're adding, then don't add to that. But you might not be able to help it. You might say, I don't like it that I'm adding. Why do I keep doing that? Can't I just have one clear thought without a second opinion coming in, or I shouldn't do this, or I should do this, or so on and so forth. Michael.
So have you just implied that there is no wrong way to listen?
What do you guys think about what he's saying?
It reminds me of what we were at Footsteps this afternoon talking about Dogen and Dogen's style of writing. And I can't remember all of the phrases, but one of them is, you know, it came out of the Chinese, and then just the history behind that. But it was, for instance, Buddha is mind itself. And then another way of saying it was the mind itself is Buddha. And so it could be considered in different ways. And it sounds like a moving target to me.
It seems to be. Anytime we lock down on anything, it's generally, we think of that as fixation. Try to make something be a certain way. Make sure it doesn't change, so we can have some kind of security.
So, because I have a short memory, you said we don't, you won't know what's being said if you fundamentally listen.
Yes.
And you said this is wisdom.
Yes.
Does that change?
Yes, I think it can change, because then you will know what's being said. But you won't have a things may come and things may go. Things may show up and be very bright and clear and outlined and definite, and then they may tumble and go away. And you don't follow it with some kind of, oh my gosh, I'm losing my wisdom, or I had this open dimension and now it's leaving me. So the whole territoriality of it, it just starts to dissolve. And that's why the boundaries become very natural. They're very natural boundaries rather than artificial. If people would see this, there would be, not likely, I think we have a few millennia to go yet. I don't know if it'll even happen on this ball of dirt. But if people saw this, there would just be a natural harmony based on respect. When I say respect, I mean actually respecting someone else right where they're at. Don't meddle with other people's karma. You have no idea who you're talking to. It's very, on some level, it's very presumptuous for me to even get up on this little platform in this chair and even tell you anything. I'm only doing it because you're here.
Betty.
Hi, Betty.
Hi. I was wondering, you said that when you really hear, you realize you didn't hear. Is that right?
Well, kind of. When you hear, there's so much space there that the clarity around it is everything that's there. You're not separating something out. So you're not just focusing on this one little nugget or this one little sentence or something and locking down on that and personalizing it one way or another. It's right. It's wrong. It's so you're hearing it. It's more all pervasive. Sometimes called vipassana or panoramic awareness. It's the awareness that is basically taking in everything. You may pick things up. You may not.
Well, what I was wondering
Yes.
is if in that space, what that space was, is the point where you quit believing you already know what they're saying. Sort of.
Yeah, I think there's something to that because that's a good one because quite often we find ourselves wanting to finish people's sentences. Sometimes they're starting to talk and we already know what they're going to say. So we might even start talking, or sometimes we'll hear them talk and well, we know what they're going to say. So I'm going to start to think of what I'm going to say back to them.
Okay.
Any other questions before anything? Any questions from off in the dissonance? Any questions here before we close?
Just to remind everybody, this Saturday is our all day. Please come. And don't forget our Donna boxes in the hallway.
May their lists penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiro san shi 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 son bu sa mu sa mu ko ja the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Bodhisattvas, the great Prajna Paramita,